I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I'm going
Hey,
in
I'm Danielle
circles,
Davies, and you're
going
listening to
in
Roar, a
circles.
show that
I
amplifies
should
the
get
voices of women
away
breaking
from
barriers, leading
here.
change, and
There's a
making real
better
impact.
place for me,
Keep listening for bold
better
ideas and
place for
stories that
me.
inspire you to
Trying to
find your
play my
voice and make some
symphony,
noise.
but there's so much.
Every 60 seconds, 9 people in the United States are sexually assaulted. That's 4.7 million rapes each year. But the people behind the Fund to Prevent Sexual Assault believe sexual violence is preventable. Your support helps fund programs that empower young people, train leaders, and create safer spaces for everyone. Prevention starts with action. Visit preventsa.org to learn more and donate today. Welcome back to Roar. This is your host, Danielle Davies. Today, I'm beyond excited to welcome a woman who's not just telling great stories, she's starting a movement. Kirsten Miller is a best-selling novelist whose books do more than entertain. They ignite something in the women who read them, myself included. Her novel The Change reimagines midlife not as an ending, but as a beginning, a moment when women step into extraordinary power. Her newest book, Lula Dean's Little Library of Banned Books, tackles censorship, truth, and why banning books is about so much more than the books themselves. And through her Substack newsletter, Watch Your Back, looking out for women and girls in America, she's urging women to take action on their bodies, their rights, their safety, and their power. If you've ever felt like you were being told to sit down and shut up, this conversation's for you. Let's talk about transformation, resistance, and the stories that can change everything. Welcome, Kirsten.
Oh, thank you. That was the best intro ever.
Thanks. I'm
Thank
on a
you.
roll. This is good. Thank you. Well, as you know, because we just spoke, I'm very excited that you're here. And I read The Change probably 2 years ago, and I couldn't stop raving about it. And it's one of those books that has stayed with me. Actually, I turned 50 in August too. So I'm like, it's happening. Like I'm transforming in a powerful way. Well, and we can only hope. So thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited. And I think you have so much to say. So thank you.
Thank
Um,
you.
I wanted to ask you, the first question is not just specifically about your books, but when did you realize that fiction could be such a tool for action?
So, it's funny because I knew I've discovered it and then I kind of lost sight of it for a while. I actually started my writing career writing books for young people. And my first book series was called Kiki Strike. And I wrote it because it was really targeted very directly at about 12-year-old girls. Because I kept seeing I'd been in advertising for a long time and I'd worked on, what was back then called feminine hygiene products. And one of the things that we looked at really closely was the changes that girls went through when they hit puberty. And you would see these little, badass, 10, 11-year-old girls who were just super, spirited and full of moxie, and then they would hit puberty and you could see some of that confidence kind of draining away, because there were all these sort of stigmas and secrecy surrounding menstruation and all of these things. And I thought, I wish I could write something that would kind of inoculate girls at that age and sort of give them kind of the little kick in the butt that they needed to sort of stay those little badasses throughout their teenage years. And so Kiki Strike is it's about 6 delinquent Girl Scouts who discover an underground city beneath Manhattan. But it's really kind of a lot of people have written to me and said it was their first feminist handbook. And I love that. I mean, it's funny because that was in 2006 that book came out. So like the first generation group of girls who read that book is now grown up and they're doing like the most amazing stuff. And I was sort of in contact with a lot of them, so I know what they're doing now. And it's just amazing to see. But, then as I continued my career, I went on and did books that were a little bit less, you know, had a little bit less of a mission to them. And I got tired. Writing's really exhausting. And I've, had just finished a couple of series that I wrote with Jason Segel, who's a lovely guy. And I didn't know if I wanted to write anymore because I was just
Wow.
burnt out. It was a wonderful experience, but I was very, very tired. And then I decided if I'm going to do this as a career, I want to get up every day and feel like I'm doing something worthwhile, like that I'm sort of trying to make the world a better place in some form or fashion. And I love poking bears. Like I do. I love causing trouble. I love poking bears. I love sort of, talking about, I love kind of prodding women to stand up and, you know, do what they know is right. And so
You
that's
see?
been my
Yeah.
mission ever since.
Well, you're doing a great job at it. And actually, this is not what I was planning to ask you next, but I have to know. You just mentioned you were in advertising. So it's funny because when I was reading about in the book The Change, if you haven't read it, there's a woman named Harriet who was a PR executive or an advertising executive, and she is no longer. She transforms into something else, which I'm not going to give anything away. I hope that wasn't too much already. But did you use your own experience in that field to kind of inform that?
Yes. Yes. In fact, there's an ad in that chapter of where in which a green tea product, magically purifies a woman, and it's incredibly sexist. That is a real ad. I actually quit an ad agency over that specific ad. And so I threw it in there. And yeah,
Oh,
I'm hoping the guys who wrote it stand up and take credit at some point, but nobody has. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of that stuff in that chapter is very, very much based on my experiences.
I was wondering where she came from because you had such good insights. And and it's funny because I've totally used them as like I've relied on them. I realize it's a fictional book, but I'm relying on it. Somebody was talking to me, actually another podcast guest was talking about women in the music industry and how, you don't necessarily see it from the outside, but it's really skewed towards the men. You don't There's just a lot happening that we don't see because we're not in that industry. And I was like, it's the same thing in advertising, but I actually have no idea
Oh
when
no,
it's
it
these
is
small things.
absolutely. And I had one of the first people who read it and asked me to do, she was starting a podcast. I'm not sure if it's still around or not, but it was a young woman who was in advertising. And one of the reasons that I said yes to her was because I was eager to pick her brain. Because at that point, it'd been a few years since I'd worked in an agency on it. I'd been doing advertising freelance for a long time, but I hadn't been in an agency for a while, and she assured me that it was exactly the same as it ever was, which was
Oh,
so
great.
interesting, you know?
Yeah, you were hoping for strides here, but apparently it resonates.
Not so much, yeah.
Yeah. Well, but on the plus side, your books often challenge the traditional stories that women are told about themselves. Like there's a lot of empowerment in your characters, and it often comes from places you wouldn't expect. So and you mentioned what, kind of the impetus behind Kiki Strikes. What's the most harmful myth about women you'd love to see disappear, if you can name one?
Yeah, so when I was, and this was, it's funny how certain things that people just say off the cuff, throughout the course of your life end up lodging in your brain. So when I was in my mid-20s, I was working with a woman who was the grand old age of 38. Um, and she informed me, and I think she was doing it in kind of a mean-spirited way. She was, was told me that, there would come a day when I would be invisible, that it happened to all women, that, you would just sort of walk down the street one day and nobody would see you or care about you or listen to you or anything. And I thought, I was like, absolutely not. Are you kidding me? But I remember thinking like, I was never terribly worried about myself. I was, I've always been the sort of person who'll stand up and make a lot of noise. But, it seemed so sad to me that women were leading their lives, and seeing this kind of cutoff point in their, mid to late 40s, after which they would, they would be useless. And it was just, I mean, it absolutely boggled my mind that that was a thing. And then as I started approaching the moment, I live in New York with all these amazing women, people who are very successful, people who are very smart, all of these things, artists, all sorts of professionals. And they would start out talking about perimenopause or menopause, and they would almost whisper the word. And I thought, what the is going on here? This is like crazy. Like, we are smarter and, more financially stable and more experienced and more everything than we were 20 years ago when we were, running around like idiots. Not that all 20-year-olds do. I certainly did, but not all 20-year-olds do. But like, I'm like, this is the best time of our lives. Why are we dreading it? And so that was one of the things that I really wanted to attack with the change, was just this whole notion that we we inherited from our mother's generation and our grandmother's generation, that there would become a day when, as a woman, you were no longer needed or wanted around. And it makes no sense.
It doesn't make any sense. But I also feel like in some ways, like I wasn't going to talk so much about like the book specifically in case people didn't read it, but I'm just going to say just was at the point where Celeste, this is also on the change because I'm rereading it, friends who are listening, I'm rereading the book, and this woman, Celeste, I'm giving something away. She's having an affair, and she's fine with it. And her husband is having an affair, and she's fine with that too.
Yeah.
And it's almost like this notion of invisibility, in some ways, you can flip it around so that you're like, and it almost serves me. Like, I'm going to be whoever I want to be because I'm now no longer even regarded in some ways, or expected to not be regarded.
Well, I mean, I've always loved sort of taking a weakness and making it a strength, that sort of jujitsu move where like in Kiki, my first books, when I'm talking to 12-year-olds, I'm like, being, people not seeing you is a huge advantage. If people talk in a room like you're not even there, you can listen in. Like, there are so many advantages to not being taken seriously. Use them. And I feel like those same words of wisdom can be applied to women our age as well. It's just sort of like, yeah, if they don't take you seriously, if they underestimate you, you can use that to your advantage. They will never see you coming. They will never think that you're capable of what you're capable of doing. It gives you the element of surprise every single time. So use it. Like, instead of, sort of just accepting what they tell you and sort of absorbing all of these insults, look at them and figure out how you might be able to turn it around to work in your favor. Because often you do that.
You've turned it around epically in both books that we talked about, but especially in The Change, because it's in a really kind of mystical way that isn't necessarily par for the course. So you've changed midlife for women into really a superpower for these women. And I'm just curious, when you first started reading that, when you first started writing it, was that your intention, or were you just going to make them super strong, brave, wonderful women, which is, by the way, its own kind of superhero, don't get me wrong, or superpower, but instead they've got a little bit something extra. Each of them has a little bit something kind of out there, a little woo-woo, a little magical about them. So I was just...
Yeah. It's not too, so I didn't want to go all Marvel with it. Like,
Right.
I always wanted to keep one foot very firmly planted in reality. So these are sort of things, powers that you could kind of imagine somebody having. And they were inspired by different people that I had encountered over the years. In fact, I think probably the earliest inspiration came, I mean, God, like probably 17 years ago or so. I was going to a gym in Greenwich Village, and I would go there around lunchtime, and this woman would come in every day, and she was this amazingly glamorous woman, and she must have worked at an art gallery or like a fashion magazine or something. And she would come in and get into her her workout clothes, and she would get on an elliptical, and I watched her with just absolute, I was fascinated because she would beat the thing up Like, I mean, she, first of all, she had the resistance on like 40 or like whatever. It was crazy. And she would be like this, and she would punch the air and you could just see her cursing under, and I was like, wow, she's really mad. And I kept thinking, like, what if we could harness that power? What if we could hook that elliptical up to the electrical grid or something like that? What could she be? What could she? What kind of energy would she be able to generate? And so that was really my first. I think that was the very, very origin of it. Was
Well,
like,
because all of them are really, like you said, they have one foot in the door. They're all just the tiniest hair outside of everyday experiences. Do you know what I mean? Just the tiniest little bit. Like nobody goes too far. It's not crazy. They're not messing with the weather. It's not like some Marvel thing, which that's fun too, but it's not that at all. And I think because it's so close to reality, it's even more powerful.
I mean, that's what, I mean, to me, that's what I've always loved. Like, I always love the sort of, I mean, people have called it magical realism, which I think is probably the closest thing to, it lives in the intersection of a lot of different genres, but like, I loved magical realism as a kid, like particularly like South American magical realism, and just that sort of that sense that, like, you know, something that the world was a slightly more magical place than it actually is, like that things could possibly happen. And to me, that was far more fun than fantasy, or superheroes or anything like that. I wanted to believe that these things might actually happen in real life. So that's kind of, I play with that in almost all of my books. Just this it's a little bit, it's kind of like Technicolor, you know what I mean? It's a little bit more vivid, a little bit one step over, the line into fantasy, but nothing too far. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing like unbelievable.
No.
It's funny because I read what's that? Is it Sarah Moss, that series? It's very popular.
Yes.
Fra-
Crown of the, yeah,
Thorn and yes, you know what I'm talking
I
about.
do
And
know what you're talking about.
but it took me like 100 and some pages because I was like, I just can't get into this fairy world. I was like, it's just too much. I mean, eventually you get there, and that's great.
Yeah.
That's the power of world building, but it's not this. This is something else entirely. And this is really, I think that the books you've written, and specific, well, both of them, but now that I just read Lula Dean's Little Library of Banned Books, they're very motivating, and I feel like they're very empowering for women everywhere for a lot of reasons. So
This is exactly, so I had this conversation with a bunch of people yesterday. This is exactly what I am trying to do. Exactly. So my, and I was going to say it's my theory, but it's not my theory because I actually know it for a fact that we are the most powerful generation of women in the history of the world. We are, like, in every way, shape, and form. We are more educated, we are, more financially powerful, more socially powerful, more politically powerful. I don't think that we know how powerful we are yet. And I think that we are still letting, you know, things that happen, current events, evil people here. Like, I mean, I feel like we
evil
still let
lords.
them kind of push us into a corner, and like, we're scared and what are they going to do to us? And it's like, we can stop them. We have the power. Women are more than half of the population, and women over 40 are 25% of the entire American population. We buy everything. I mean, it's just, if we want to and we summon all of our powers and put them to use, we can turn this world into one that is a much better place for us and for our daughters and our nieces and the generations to come. And that's what I'm trying to do, is just sort of is really wake women up and say, as in the case of Lula Dean, go out there and fight for what you know is right, even if it scares the hell out of you. Go and do it. You have to do it. Like, who else is going to do it? You're the one. Go do it. Or in the case of the change, really taking on a lot of the violence and the sexism and the whatnot that we dealt with in our younger years, and saying, let's find a way to stop that, so that our daughters and, our granddaughters and, the generations to follow don't have to. We can change that.
And it's interesting
Yeah.
you said that. I'm cutting you off. I'm so sorry. Because you're just reminding me, I remember when the Me Too movement first
Mhm.
first started to come into like public consciousness. And I remember thinking, God, I've been so lucky that I haven't had a major attack like so many other women have had. And I was like, I am just so lucky. Like this is, thank God. And then I thought about all the little things though, like all the little things that were not right, things that and how I gauged it was, would it be okay if somebody did this to my daughter? And that's when you're like, oh, hell no. Like you
Yeah.
can take a lot as an adult woman. You're like, I'm an adult woman. I'm me. I've been around. I've seen things. I can take it. But when you look at the next generation, you're like, oh, that is not about to happen to my daughter. No matter if it's something that somebody saw as not that big of a deal. If it's a big deal to me, it would be a really big deal to her. So it's just interesting how you mentioned that and fighting for your daughters and how kind of we're looking at that world of accepted violence or just accepted aggression that we didn't ask for and we didn't want, and how we really just nodded our heads and went along with it, and it's just a different world now.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I when the change first came out, a lot of people assumed that I was that I hated men, which I absolutely do not. I've like the men in my life are wonderful people, and extremely supportive, and just I had the greatest dad ever. But I think one of the problems is it's not just that we're kind of waking up to what happened and how wrong it was. I think a lot of men out there have no idea that women face these kind of things on a daily basis. I think that, that it is something that often comes as a huge surprise to them. In fact, I've had a, a few months ago, I was talking to a woman who was a teacher in Tennessee, where they are forbidden to talk about a lot of different subjects, including sexism. And yep, in the classroom, and she said that one of the things that she did was just, instead of opening up a discussion around a particular topic, she would have the girls describe. She'd be like, girl, to all the young women in the class, tell us about how if you were going to go out after school, it's dark outside, there's nobody else around, tell me what precautions you would take, like, going from, the school, building to your car in the parking lot on the other side of the, uh, the campus. And so the girls would go through these whole, I mean, they all had these rituals that they had, because they knew, how dangerous it could be to walk across a broad, dark parking lot. Um, and she said you would watch the boys' faces just like their jaws drop, because they had no idea that the girls were experiencing that kind of fear, that they were taking these kind of precautions, that, something as simple as a walk a few hundred yards through the dark could be as terrifying as an experience as it can be for a woman. She goes, so it was a real revelation for a lot of them, and I feel like we're not having those conversations with boys as well. And I think a lot of them are open to learning these things. We're just not telling them.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I also feel like I always have to say, and I love men. Like I have a son and a husband. I love them both. My father. Like
I
it
know.
doesn't like it's not an anti-man thing. It's a pro women and just and really pro everybody because it behooves no one for one half of the population to be less than their best selves.
No, absolutely. I mean, it just, it always strikes me as odd when, yeah, or insane rather, when people talk about, the conversations that are we having right now around DEI and women in the workforce and not being as competent as, and it's just sort of, it's a, do you really want to take half of your population and sort of push them to the side and not let them become the doctors and the scientists and the everything that, that will make our society stronger and better and more powerful and more economically successful? It's just, I don't know. It's just, it's in everybody's best interest
It's
that
mind-boggling.
half of society doesn't feel, terrified and put upon all the time.
Well, and speaking of when you mentioned that your friend can't teach anything to do with sexism, it actually is perfect way for me to ask you about Lula Dean.
Mm.
So, you wrote about censorship in a pretty powerful way, and it's like really a spot on like direct message for exactly what's going on in so much of the country, I feel like. Why was this story so important for you to tell?
My gosh, there were a lot of reasons. It was actually the very basic idea came from my editor who had been in Texas where, book banning is quite common. And she was in Austin where people had put signs in their front yards that said, come and get it, meaning we have all the banned books. And if you want to borrow them, come and get them at our house. And she was really inspired by that. And she said, what would you think about a novel about a little library filled with banned books? And once she said that, I don't usually, I was in the middle of working on something else. I was looking forward to finishing it, but I couldn't get this idea out of my head. And there were so many books that I knew from having been in the YA world that had been challenged or pulled off of shelves that absolutely needed to be there, like Speak, which is about rape, and, Diary of Anne Frank, and, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and all of these incredibly important books. So I wanted to show how powerful it was to have those books fall into the right hands, the hands of people who really needed them. And and have it be sort of not exactly who you would expect to need them. So I just loved that matchmaking, and I sat down and I thought, okay, I'll see if this is something that I'm really passionate about. And I wrote the first 4 chapters in a single weekend, which is super fast for me. I never write that fast. And I thought, God, there's so much here that I need to say. And, also as a Southerner, I knew I wanted to write about the South at some point, but I had not expected to do it quite so soon. But once I started, there was just so much about, you know, this region that I grew up in that I love very much, and that also really, really hurts my soul on a daily basis as well. There's so much that I felt like I needed to say about our culture, our heritage, all of these things that I think we have not been honest with ourselves about. So once I started writing, it just poured out. I wrote the whole book in about, I think, 4 months.
Oh my
So
God. But you did it without, you could have easily vilified the South or the people in the book, like that you could have vilified Lula Dean. And while she's not somebody that I would necessarily want to hang out with every
yeah.
day, you all of them, the movie star, you really turned it around. And even with the South, you put a big emphasis on, look, we have all these amazing things here. We are Southern hospitality. It's a phrase. Like,
Yes.
we welcome everybody. So why would you not put that forward? I think that that's such a helpful way to have done it. And you and I just talked briefly about this before we started recording too, that even in the country right now, there's a tendency to want to be, well, maybe you don't have this tendency, but I have the tendency to be like, why would you do this? Like, why would you pick this? What are you thinking? But that's not going to change anybody's mind. And that's not going to
No.
help anybody. The way that you wrote it really showed a lot of compassion for a different way of thinking and really managed to bring people together, at least fictionally. I mean, obviously it's a book and it ends and it's finite and we can be like, oh, look, you know.
And it does have, it is people are I've seen like a couple of reviews here and there like it's not realistic. I'm like, okay, it's a book where all the people in a town visit a little library and find the book that they need. Oh no, it's supposed to be super realistic.
You're like,
Yeah,
this happened. This happened. Yeah,
it,
it's
it
real.
oh yeah. But yeah, I mean it's the South is it's been a scapegoat for a lot of issues that are very, very American. And when you write a book about book banning and you go all around the country and you talk to people, librarians and school teachers and whatnot, you learn very, very quickly that it is happening everywhere. It's happening in Massachusetts, it's happening in Wisconsin, it is happening in Colorado, it is happening in all of these places that we assume are deep, deep, deep blue. And it's certainly not just the South that's having problems with this. But it's so easy for this country to kind of to sort of push things off as a Southern problem. And there is not a place in this country that doesn't suffer from the same issues that people pin
Oh,
on the South.
definitely. Definitely. There might be little spots that don't, but
Well, I
that's
think Brooklyn is perfect.
right, right, right,
Brooklyn.
exactly. Exactly.
Like we have
Well,
no problems whatsoever here in Brooklyn.
well, what about do you have advice for women who want to push back against censorship in their own communities since it is happening
Get
everywhere?
involved. Okay. It's like we spend way too much time these days, and I'm not talking about women specifically, but everybody. We spend too much time yelling into the void of social media. Get off the computer, get off of your phone, and go into your communities. And if you are the sort of person who wants to run for something, which I hope, a lot of people are, run for your school board, run for your city council, run for all of these small little offices that have been left vacant and, by Democrats in particular, and have been filled up by people with agendas that we don't always agree with. Go run against them, or at the very least, go to the meetings and find out what's happening and speak up. We used to, not even in the distant past, we had local newspapers that would tell us what was happening. We don't have those anymore in a lot of
Which is
places.
crazy. We don't have I worked for a few. That's why I'm like, and they're gone. They're just no
I know.
longer. And it's a real disservice to everybody.
It
I mean,
absolutely is.
we have there's no accountability because people don't show up and they don't know the news because there's not even that one reporter sitting in the meeting, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're from so it's so funny because my hometown's newspaper is still up and running. It's a wonderful newspaper. It's called the Silva Herald, and it's so fun because I volunteer in the park here in Brooklyn, Prospect Park, and I'm working with this young woman who is she is, I don't know what exactly her role is there, but she works with the park. She's a nature expert of some sort. And I asked her where she was from because I recognized her accent. And her father is the editor of my hometown paper. And we had this long discussion about how amazing it is, how like the best part for everyone is reading the arrest record for the week. That's, like if you live in a small southern town, like the first thing everybody does when they get the paper is open it up to see who got arrested that week. So I feel like
We
people are missing out without that.
we have one, and I actually can't remember what this part is called, but in the back of the paper, like everybody can just write in their like complaints about people. And it's like that's like the first thing you look at because it's like whoever stole the
Wait, is this in your
stuff.
town, in the town you live in
It's a
now?
little further south, but it's yeah,
Oh my
in
God. I
Townley.
would
Yeah.
buy, like, give me a subscription to the
Well, I'm
paper
gonna mail you
now.
one.
I see, this is like, I wonder if there isn't like a way to kind of, to bring some of this stuff back. by kind of embracing, the arrest record and the complaints and all of these things that people
You're
really
like,
love, the
see,
gossip of it.
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes, because it's that, but then it also informs, you're
Mhm.
so well, okay, so you've got a newsletter out though, and it's
Yes.
called Watch Your Back, Looking Out for Women and Girls in America, which is very clearly a rallying cry for women. It's
Mhm.
so what drove you to create that? And also, a lot of people I've noticed in business or in anything that they have to sell, or people they have to be likable enough for their thing to sell. They shy away a little bit from politics, right? And even if they feel strongly about it, they say, well, I don't, this isn't the conversation to be had when we're talking about this other thing. Why is speaking out so important to you?
Well, because I think that we're in very serious jeopardy, as a country and as women and girls, in this country. And I felt like it's one of those things. I try my guiding principle in life is the avoidance of regret. So I try to act in a way where I won't feel bad about it at some point in the future. So I know that if I did nothing and terrible things happened in this country, that I would regret not having done something when I had the chance. So and also I was very angry at the media in general, which I think, it's not, you know, I think there is a lot of good stuff out there. I think there are a lot of great journalists out there, but as somebody who lives in New York and has a long-term, relationship and love for the New York Times, it has been very, very discouraging to see the coverage of various issues in the Times lately. In the Washington Post, I mean,
I
good
mean,
God, it's just pathetic. Um, so I really wanted to step up and try and do something. And I think that we are one of the groups that is in the most danger. Now, I care a lot about a lot of different kinds of groups, but one of the resolutions that I have made is to fight on a single front this time. I feel like if I try to, and I feel it's true of all of us. So I'm going to pull this a little bit closer. I feel like it's true of all of us that if we try to, to fight every single battle out there, we are going to lose. We're just never going to be able to put the kind of time and energy and attention into to doing what we need to do if we're fighting on 40 different fronts. But if each of us chooses the one that, that really hits home for us the most and puts everything that we have into that, I think we can really make a huge difference. So for me, because of the nature of my work, because of the fact that I have a teenage daughter, because I'm female and have lived in this body for a very long time, my passion right now, above all others, is protecting women and girls. So the purpose of the newsletter, which is filled with profanity but is incredibly informative, because I do read a lot, and it's sort of like I end up at the end of the week having a collection of links that I want to do something with. So I sort of put them into a newsletter that's funny and profane, and but really I think gets to the heart of the issues that impact us the most. And, there's a lot of stuff coming up right now that I think we need to be really, really, really aware of and willing to, to fight for.
and you're right too, because the idea of overextending yourself, and I feel like, and that, I watched a video yesterday, I think it was Ezra Klein, showing Steve Bannon saying, what they'll do is hit you with muzzle fire. So
Yeah.
it's like you're batting, you're batting, you're batting. And just this morning, as I was telling you, something came out, and it was about and it was such like, there's so many huge things happening that I was surprised that this was the one that made me like, it's like I just snapped because I just had enough. It was at West Point. They eliminated all the clubs that were cultural of any sort. So any kind of women's club that there had been there for decades,
Yeah.
Vietnamese students, any kind of club. So I have a son who's a college freshman, and I just was thinking, I can't imagine somebody taking a resource away from my kid, like in for no
I
reason.
know.
It's just it's such a it was such a it's such a not for what reason would you take that away? Like, what do you have to gain by removing that from a college? It's not, there's no money involved. It's
Yeah,
we're just groups. So that was the thing. And at first I was like, oh my goodness, like I'm so outraged. And then I'm like, okay, we have to focus. We have to focus on the biggest things to happen. Not that that's not important. It's all important, and that's the problem. It is all important. So you really have
yeah.
to kind of condense your focus to make the biggest impact.
Yeah, that's a real shame about West Point. I have a lot of respect for West Point. It's when you grow up in a place where people do not have a great deal of money on average. West Point is like the Harvard of the like the not so rich people. You know what I mean? It's like that is where some of the smartest kids that I grew up with ended up going to school, and it actually has always been one of the things that has made me very, very proud of this country that we have an institution like that, or like the Coast Guard Academy, or, Air Force Academy that takes these incredibly smart kids you know, and gives them a world-class education and
Yeah.
puts them in charge of stuff. So it's
Yeah.
sad to
Yeah.
hear that they're messing with West Point.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting that that's what I mean. So many like hugely critical things have happened with women's health care, and so I was like, this is the thing that's going to put me over the edge today. But apparently, it was. So I'm glad I'm talking to you. So you're redirecting me, which is great. Um, and so at the Roar podcast, we love to highlight women who are changing lives in unique ways. So not necessarily the most traditional paths. They're not always running for office. They're not always in politics or leading think tanks. Sometimes there's an abortion doctor or a women's
Yeah.
self-defense teacher. So in your books, you seem to celebrate similar women, those who don't necessarily fit a conventional mold, but are still managing to make a huge impact, whether they're sneaking, you know, banned books into a little library or becoming a physical force like Joe in The Change.
Mhm.
What draws you to these kinds of women? And what do you think we can learn from their unconventional approaches?
I think what draws me to them is that that's who I want to be. Like so much of this, so many of these characters are it's almost like they are models of women that I aspire to emulate. I mean, these are the kind of women that I would like to be. It's when I talk about sort of giving women a kick in the pants and how powerful you are, go out and use it. That's a message that's intended as much for myself as it is for anyone else. So that's what attracts me to it. And I grew up with a mother who was very much like that, and she was kind of a force of nature. So I always admired that in people. I loved, seeing strong women who were not, kind of conventional. And in the South, we do convention real well. It's and the women who didn't necessarily fit into those little boxes and still kind of kicked and punched and fought their way through life. Those are the ones I always admired the most. So I put them in my books.
Well, also another thing you put in your book, obviously in Lula Dean, you've got like a whole bunch of, and you use real books for the most part,
Yeah.
real books that have been banned, and you mention them, and that's awesome because sometimes you're like, this was banned, it's crazy. But also, you talk about it at the very end. You say The Girl's Guide to the Revolution is one book that has not been written. That's just a fake title, and wouldn't it be great if it were? Are there any books you recommend to readers that they should absolutely be adding to their reading list if they feel like you do? Besides your own.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm actually sitting next to all of my books that this is my favorite bookshelf. This is like where all the witchy books and stuff are. I love Invisible Women is what's her name? By her last name's Perez, is a fantastic book that just sort of really uncovers, how to what degree this world was built by men for men. And it doesn't do it in a sort of a combative way. It really reveals, how this everything that from medications to automobiles to, bathrooms in public places, everything was built by men to serve their needs. Because it's not that they were being evil about it necessarily. It's just, that's human nature. You build for yourself. They did
Right.
not take us into consideration at all. But when you look at all of this together, you see how much we have to wade through on a daily basis. Just how much more friction we deal with as women, and what kind of stress and strain that puts on us. And it's really, really eye-opening, even for people like me who have thought about these kinds of issues for many years, just to see, how, you know, like all the medications that we take were tested on men. They don't really know how they work on us. How cars were designed for people of a certain size. So those of us who are a bit smaller tend to die a lot more often if we're in an accident. I mean, it's this amazing. I recommend it, if just to open your eyes. It's a great book for men too. Like, because there's nothing at all even remotely combative about it. It's just sort of telling you this is how things were built and this is how the world works. And what else do I
Oh,
have?
I'm definitely adding that to my own reading list. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. It's just, even men who hate women.
Okay.
Um, and that is combative, but it's about, so the next project that I'm working about, it will be sort of on the manosphere.
Okay.
And it kind of like it'll be kind of a walk through the manosphere in a funny, kind of entertaining, but incredibly serious way. And this was one of my source books. So this is very much about the making of kind of the men's rights movement, the incel movement, all of these men who have come together to really spread misogyny, around the internet. And it will blow your mind. The author's last name is Bates. So
Okay.
I highly recommend that as well.
You just reminded me, and I will never be interviewing him because, first of all, I'm only interviewing women, and also because he's Stephen King. But did you ever read, and I bet I can't reach him, have you ever read the book he wrote with his one son called Sleeping Beauties?
No.
So it's interesting. And that's another one that I was like, I really like this book. And I'll have to go back and reread it because it's written by a man. So, but I felt like he really, first of all, I feel like Stephen King always writes good versus bad. It's always good versus evil. That's really the theme of his books, not necessarily horror, but good versus evil. But it's
Yeah.
about this, plague on humanity that puts all the women to sleep.
Hmm.
So the women sleep kind of in a cocoon, and the men have to deal with life without women. And it's very interesting because there they are in this world that they've created, and the women actually go elsewhere. And it's just that's going to be my book recommendation.
I'll look into that. Listen, I mean, I think Stephen King is, I mean, he's a great guy. Like
Yeah.
he really is. Like, I mean, I think, I think you could make an exception to the,
Oh,
the women
I would
only
love
thing
to.
for like somebody like Stephen King. I mean, he really is. He's a mensch, is what he is.
He's so great, but I do feel like I'm like he's got a lot of attention.
Yeah, yeah. Stephen
We
King.
need to put
Stephen King does not need more
He
attention.
doesn't need me. I want to shine a spotlight on women who maybe,
Uh,
aspire to their own Stephen King, but
there you
maybe
go.
Tabitha. Maybe I'll reach out to his wife. So,
Oh yeah, no, listen, I think he would be the first to say that, she's has played an enormous role in his success, and she's, a great writer of her on her own as well. So
exactly. Exactly. So, all right, the last thing I would ask you, where can we support you? So, I love everything you're doing, and I think the people who listen to this podcast will also agree and be rushing out to get your books if they haven't already read them. But where can we follow along? So, besides your Substack, is there someplace else, any kind of social media that
I'm
you?
still on Instagram. I have a real I feel like social media has done far more harm than good to our society, and I try to I've have been on all of it at some point, and I've now narrowed it down to Instagram, and which is really quite essential for authors, for better or worse. So I'm there, and I'm also on Substack. Watch your back. And yeah, those are the two main places. But I mean, the best thing that anybody can do for a writer, not just for me, is if you like the books, talk about them. As you know, as somebody in PR who's been in PR, I was in advertising, you know that the one thing that you cannot buy is word of mouth. You can't buy it. It's just sort of that's the holy
And it's the
grail.
most powerful.
Yes, it's the holy grail. It's what you want. It's like, you dream of working on a product that's good enough that people talk about it and want to share it with their friends. So like if you like what I do, you don't have to, do anything else. Tell a friend, loan them your book, whatever it is,
We will definitely tell all our friends. And yes, I have gotten a few people to read The Change, but I just finished Lula Dean. So now I'm going to, start my campaign on that.
Well, my next book is coming out in October, and it's if you like The Change, you'll like it.
I can't wait.
It does have some messing with the weather. I will warn you right now,
Oh,
but
I think I'm gonna like it. I'm excited already.
well, it's very I am very green witchy in a lot of ways. So this
Wait,
is
and do you have like a regular mailing list to tell people about your books, or is it on your
I
Substack?
don't. I've just been focused on that. I'm probably going to I have I do updates, and I have all of my events and everything on my website, which
Oh,
is
perfect. Okay.
kirstenmiller.com. So it's being updated at the moment, but hopefully in the next like month or so it'll be nice and new and have all the information there.
It's perfect. When this comes out, I'll have everything in the show notes, so all your links and stuff will be in there.
Oh, perfect. Great.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. Now I am so excited for October. Um, and yes, definitely. I'm like, please keep me posted because I can't wait to read it.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Roar. I hope Kirsten Miller's fierce and unflinching take on women, power, and action left you feeling as fired up as I was. If you loved this episode, don't forget to follow, rate, and share Roar with someone who's ready to stop playing small. And your voice matters too. Shoot me an email at danielle@thecircecollective.com to tell us what resonated most or who you want to hear from next. Coming up next week, I'm talking with Samantha Harmon, founder of The Style Editor. She's a former newspaper editor turned style coach, helping women dress and live with unapologetic confidence. If you've ever stood in front of your closet wondering where the woman you used to be went, this one's for you. Thanks again for tuning in.